The game of Survivor was originally started as a game of surviving. The island, the elements, it was very survival themed, especially in season 1. But the game that we have today is a lot more about, surviving one another, surviving the challenges, surviving the vote, and that's really what the game of Survivor has become. So today we're going to be talking about the third component of the main Survivor mantra: outwit, outplay, and outlast. And that outlasting portion has changed from being a very survival-based game to a more strategic, not as much about the elements sort of game. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Welcome to Idle Talk. My name is Peyton, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jacob, and we're here to talk about Survivor. How are you doing today, Jacob?
I'm doing pretty good. Excited to talk about the last little element of the core components of Survivor. So we just finished up season 1 recently, as we've said before. So the main Survivor that I've been exposed to is the more recent seasons, especially with all the changes that we've seen in the new era post season 40. So it's pretty interesting to see where they started from and where they are now in terms of that aspect of the game, because I think that aspect of the game is just the almost complete 180, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's changed a lot, and we're about to start season 2, and so we'll be able to see, if there's any minor changes, from season 1 to season 2. But I don't know how much we're going to notice season to season on how this portion changes. But on a macro scale, when you're looking at season 1 to season 45, you can see a big difference. We kind of talked about this last week, where in season 1, you have even challenges that are themed around survival, like the paratrooper rescue or the stranded out at sea and you got to go get them with the boat and all that sort of stuff. Like, it was very survival themed. Or even the challenge where they're on the beach. We didn't even talk about this last week, but where there's the challenge on the beach and they're having to make themselves visible to a helicopter or a plane going by. And so that's something where it was very clearly a game about surviving, kind of like that survival, like a man versus wild sort of genre show, but it's a reality TV show.
Yeah.
Whereas now today, sure, they're living on an island. It's not for as long, but they don't have food. They don't even have rice now, pretty much, and the rewards aren't that good. So it is. You can make an argument, and maybe we'll talk about this in a minute, that the survival part is maybe more difficult now, but it's become less of an emphasis in the edit and in the game that we see today on TV. There's not a lot of focus on building the shelter, not a lot of focus on, most of the first season was built around, there's a lot of time dedicated to Richard, catching fish. You don't get a whole lot of that today on the Survivor we have. And, I don't think that's because people aren't catching fish when they have fishing sets. I think it's just because they don't care to show that. That's not what either they care to show or they think people are interested in seeing. So it's a really big difference from what we just watched in season 1 and what we have in today's game on Survivor.
Yeah, I would agree. And even in the sense of rewards, the way rewards have shifted, the rewards have shifted away from helping with their survival aspect. Whereas now with rewards, really the only survival related thing they get as a reward is tarp. That's kind of the biggest reward that I can think of in terms of their survival. But before, they would get the comfort reward with chairs and pillows and blankets. And then there would be rewards like a spice rack, or they would get grill sets for improving their food cooking and things like that. But those really aren't a thing anymore. The rewards now are mainly just...
Or even chickens.
Yeah, you'd get chickens.
And it wasn't even that long ago, because that was Koa Wrong had chickens. It really wasn't that long ago where we were seeing these sort of rewards. It feels really like they all went away in this new era of Survivor, where we've moved to the shorter
where
format.
It just seems like each reward is basically you just go to the sanctuary and have a meal. So I think a big portion of...
Meal is a strong word there.
So I think a big portion of the survival aspect changing is also because of the rewards, just because they're not geared towards the survival aspect anymore as well.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I mean, the rewards they're often there's more advantages. We kind of talked about those strategies. I mean, there's just advantages, there's hidden immunity aisles. There's so many other things happening in the game that matter more to people than what's going on at camp in general. One thing that I think would be really cool and interesting is like, and this isn't an original idea. I've seen this floated around before, but if you're familiar with Big Brother, I've not really seen Big Brother, but I
Mhm.
know about it. And I know that during the season, you can, or maybe, I don't know if it's during the season or whatever, but you can watch like a 24/7 feed of what's happening at the
Hmm.
house. Like it's the whole thing is they're always under surveillance and you can go log in online and watch them like in the house. So it's different from Survivor, obviously, but I think there's room for web only exclusive series stuff, or even like, I mean, they have Paramount Plus. Why are they not releasing bonus content? I mean, they're filming
Yeah.
everything. It really wouldn't be that hard to release, I think, bonus episodes that are just tribal life, just stuff that's happening there. It doesn't really even lean into the challenge. It shows their personality, shows them hanging out. And I think if we got to see more of that, then maybe some of these winners that we're like, we don't understand how they won or why people voted for them, it maybe makes more sense when you can see more of it. Obviously, we're not going to get to see them 24/7, 7 days a week for, however many days it is now, 26, 27 days, whatever. We're not going to see like that level of detail that like all the players are experiencing. But if we could see more of what's happening on the island, and if you have to separate that from the main episode, that's fine. I think the 90-minute episodes were a good addition to give us a bit more of what's happening at tribal, or not at tribal, but
Mhm.
at the camps within the tribes. But I think like I want more of that, because I think that is, I mean, it's a really big part of Survivor. I would say that is 90% of someone's experience on the island is surviving, because they're not doing challenges 24/7. They're not strategizing. I mean, they are probably kind of strategizing, but they're not actively in strategic conversations 24/7. A lot of the time is just
Mhm.
hanging out, doing stupid stuff, talking to one another, and all of that sort of thing. So there's a lot of stuff that we don't get to see that gets left on the cutting room floor. And I would really love to see that in a YouTube series, a Paramount Plus series, a web series, whatever it is. I would love them to release those sort of, episodes that let us see stuff. They used to do that with like Ponderosa. They used to release the web clips of like what was happening to the people that were over at Ponderosa after they got voted out. There were some bits and pieces from there, but I would really love to see a more in-depth look of what's going on the island, because I think that's really interesting, and we don't see that anymore.
Yeah, like what you were saying with the 90-minute episodes, I think it's a step in the right direction. And I think with the last season, we were starting to see a bit more of that, especially in the edit when there was the reward where Emily took the girls and they had their girls' night and the guys had their guys' night. We kind of got to see a little bit more of their interpersonal reactions and just their survival
Mm-hmm.
aspect. But I agree that it's could be taken further because 90% of the edit of what we're seeing is challenges, strategizing, tribal council. It's not really island life because everything seems to be intertwined with the game, and it does make for interesting television at some points, and then other points you want almost a return to form of what it was. And I think also that was an issue that a lot of people had with bringing back the auction in the way they did. It was a step in the right direction, but then the fact that they meddled with it by making it where the person who had the most amount of money at the coming out of the auction lost their vote, then people were just like, why can't we just
Yeah.
have an interaction where we're just seeing how they're interacting with each other? Because that's a huge component of Survivor is just how you interact with people when your guard is down, when you're not thinking about the game, when
Mm-hmm.
you're just being people. So I think that's something that the
Yeah.
new era has tried to kind of shift back to, but still has a long way to go. And something that's really interesting to watch in the old seasons, that I'm really liking about the old seasons, and now seeing the new season, something I hope that they continue to go back towards what it was.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point about the auction. And so that doesn't, relate directly into the outlasting segment, but I do think it relates to this overall conversation of returning
Mhm.
to form, which is I think where this conversation is going to go. And I think like it was a great step in the right direction, like you said. I think bringing back the auction was the right move, and they made two key changes to it. one I think was really good. I really liked the challenge
Mhm.
beforehand that resulted in how much money they
Yeah.
had to spend. And so they were directly rewarded in the auction for their efforts leading
Mhm.
up to it. And so people who performed poorly didn't really get to play. And then people who performed really well got, to buy a $900 milkshake or
Mhm.
whatever it was. So I think that was a really interesting change, and I think that's a good way to update it and make it kind of fit into this modern game of Survivor. But like you said, where there's a penalty at the end where you lose your vote, I think that's stupid. Like I think that's dumb, and it's dumb when it's thrown on you at the auction because it's one of those things where if that was mentioned earlier, that might not be so bad. If it was mentioned when they were doing that challenge, okay, now they know if I have the least amount of money, there's a good shot that I'm left over at the end and I could lose my vote. And maybe that changes how they go out and they collect stuff. Maybe alliances are collecting stuff together to ensure that they all have some money and no one's left at the end or something like that. Like that could have been more interesting, but just springing it on them at the auction and all, I just think that was I just didn't I don't think that was a good twist. And we've talked about this before and we'll talk about it again and again and again that I hate when they're penalized for something
Mhm.
like that and then they're losing their vote. Seems like the worst penalty possible. I would if I was on the island, I would rather them go stick me in
Mhm.
exile. Go put me on exile island. At least I still have my vote. Maybe I'm not talking to the tribe for a night, but at least I still have my vote and I'm not totally
Yeah.
useless. Like there are other ways to penalize people if you really want to have a penalty. I would rather do rewards. It's like the whole teacher theory is that it's better to reward good behavior than to punish and like correct bad behavior sometimes, like positive reinforcement sort of thing. So I think like positive reinforcement on the island probably makes a lot of sense. And I think that makes more sense than throwing disadvantages all
Yeah.
the time.
Because they're players are just getting punished for playing the game. There's no, it doesn't seem like there's any rhyme or reason. That's why I don't have an issue with the beware advantage because they're doing something with the risk of a punishment, but they have a reward. There's so many instances it
Yeah.
seems now where they're just getting punished just for playing the game. Like when Emily lost her vote at the challenge because they did it in groups of 3 or something like that. I think they did it in groups of 3, and then they were the team because they did it in round elimination, so, like, they had 3 groups of 3, and then the 2 groups that finished the first section advanced, and then they went head to head, and then the winning section, all 3 of them went head to head at the end. And so Emily's group lost at the very beginning. They were the first group eliminated. And then they were basically punished where they had to go and win their vote back, which is, in my opinion, just should not be the way the game is played. You shouldn't be punished because you lost a challenge. Your punishment is that you go to tribal council. That's your punishment.
Yeah. Yeah, I never have an issue when the player has the choice to risk
Hmm.
their vote for a reward, with a beware advantage or a risk your vote challenge or any of that stuff. Like they are making the decision to give it up for a chance
Hmm.
at whatever. I'm okay with that because it becomes a strategic decision. When it's something and it's like more it's just kind of a luck of the draw, you're getting, stuck with this disadvantage. I think it makes the game more about luck than it does about skill. And I think that really is something that we've seen change a lot, especially in the last few seasons in this new era. And so that actually brings me to a question I have written down. So I kind of keep looking off over here. And I wanted to ask is I'm wondering, so something I'm thinking about is like the twists that we see in Survivor now. They've made the game more unpredictable and exciting in general for viewers, which I think is why they keep doing it, is they want to keep it fresh, new, exciting. But they've made the game less about survival and more about luck, I think, than
Hmm.
anything. So I'm wondering, do you feel like Survivor has lost its essence? I guess is a way of saying it more philosophically, but has it lost what made it unique, or is it just different and we need to deal with it and adapt with the new game? Or is there something wrong with what we have now? it's just lost the magic of what made Survivor unique in that specific regard.
I'm gonna take a pause. We can cut this out, but you're like super blurry, like super blurry. Like your internet is really bad.
I mean, I don't know if it's mine or yours. You keep cutting out and in on my side
Well,
too.
I mean, I'm hardwired into
So,
my internet.
well, either way, it records locally for both of us. So it doesn't matter if I'm blurry on your end, it's recording high quality on mine because it's just recording to my computer.
Okay. Well, I mean, is mine gonna?
So we should be fine. But
Okay.
yeah, because it's recording mine and it's recording yours, and then it's going to upload
Yeah,
both of them.
I'm getting 48 megabytes per second right now, so it's not my internet. Also, I totally forgot to plug in my headset into my microphone. Hold on.
Yeah, my internet's slow. We're actually getting new internet tomorrow, so that'll be nice. Our internet here has been pretty crappy recently, but they're moving to. Why is our upload is like really insane though? That's crazy. So it shouldn't matter because my upload's good. My download's just kind of poor. But yeah, we're getting we're setting up new internet tomorrow. We're not going to have Cox anymore after.
Sorry,
tomorrow,
I didn't hear what
probably.
you said. You broke out. You cut off for like a minute.
I cut
Like
off.
you like
for a
froze
minute.
for like a good like 15 seconds.
I was just saying that we get new internet tomorrow, so this probably won't be a problem after that.
Who's
But Cox has been atrocious.
they're replacing your internet? Who is it? Who are you getting? I mean,
Verizon. We're moving over to Verizon with unlimited data. So right now, I think they're just throttling our internet.
oh, okay. Well, I don't remember. Can you repeat your question and then I'll start like we hadn't cut.
I'll hit the end of it. Yeah. In short, show's early seasons were more about survival and less about strategy, which kind of made it, more relatable to viewers. But now it's more like unpredictable and exciting to keep it interesting for viewers. The key question is, do you think that Survivor has lost its essence, its spark, its charm, whatever you want to call it? Or is it just a new game and we need to adapt with the times?
So I don't think it's necessarily lost its charm. I just think it is different. It's hard to say that something has lost its charm completely because nothing's going to stay the same over a 24-year period. You can't ask the
Mm-hmm.
game to stay how it was back in 2000. It's just the people who play the game are different. That in and of itself is going to change the game completely, and I don't think the show would have ran as long as it has had it stayed the way it was for 24 years. I think there comes a point where too many changes becomes a bad thing. And I think producers have I think that line definitely was crossed whenever this new era has happened. I think that line has been crossed. So I think it has changed too much to where it's just too different. I still don't think it's lost its spark because it's still entertaining television. People still watch it. It garners
Absolutely. We have a
yeah.
podcast about it,
It
like,
garners millions of viewers each week. It's obviously still entertaining television and people
mm-hmm.
still enjoy watching it. I just think it's different now, obviously. And I think the positive thing is that people have been very vocal about it. People have been speaking out about it. We're speaking out about it. Other podcasts speak out about it. And I think producers are realizing that people aren't happy with the amount of changes. And I think that was very apparent in all the changes that kind of retconned what happened in 41 through 44 and the things that they did to improve 45 and make it more like what it was. But personally, I just don't think it's ever going to be what it was with it being 26 days. As terrible as it is to say, I think it's really hard to make the game what it was when you're cutting it down by almost 2 weeks. It's just really hard. The winners, and I also think that's a big reason
Yeah.
why winners feel less deserving now, is because winners previously, their game is fleshed out over a month and some change. New winners are only having their
Hmm.
game fleshed out over a little less than 4 weeks. Or no, sorry, 29 days. So or 26
Yeah.
days, so a little less than 4 weeks. So I think that's a big reason why people are saying that these people who a lot of people are dissatisfied with new winners is because their games just aren't as fleshed out.
Yeah, and that's also really interesting to me, considering that like you think it would be different than that because it's the same number of episodes, give or take. And before you were cramming, like you said, almost 2 more weeks of days into the same amount of time. Whereas now you're able to, in theory, dedicate more time to all the players on the island in that same number of episodes, right? Because you're stretching out that time. You're able to give more time from each day, to an episode, but it still doesn't feel like we're getting enough of them. And it's one of those things where like we can't ask for
Yeah.
everything, right? Because there's a lot of stuff that's just impractical from a production perspective, from budget perspective, from all that sort of stuff. So I get why they made the changes they made, but that's where I think the web series could be a really interesting way to see more of that stuff and all that. And I agree. I don't think Survivor has lost its essence or whatever. Like it still feels like Survivor, but it feels different. Where I think that it has been, and this is really where I think we can talk the most about with like Outlasting, is like it's changed so much from even just a few years ago. And that's really where I like I want to try to get back as much as we can to, you know, the millennials versus Gen X, the Koa Wrong, the like that, even like that was kind of the newer era of Survivor, like the post heroes versus villains world of Survivor, that season 20 to 35 kind of
Mhm.
range of seasons was really cool and interesting. And I think was like the peak of Survivor. I think a lot of people agree that that's where some of the best Survivor happens, especially around, we've talked about it a lot, season 19 and 20 and around there as well. But that was where Survivor felt like it was like a really perfect middle ground of outlasting in terms of survival and outlasting in terms of beating the other players and outlasting them. You would still have, in a very season one sort of way, a whole episode dedicated to building the
Mhm.
shelter. You would still have that. Nowadays, that's just a little bit of the first
Yeah.
episode. You get the very beginning. It's 3 tribes, so you're cutting a lot between the 3 of them. You don't really get to focus on any of them, but you're pretty much going into strategy right away. There's very little on building the shelter. And it's like the same beaches every time, so the shelters end up all kind of looking the same. It doesn't, it's not as interesting, which I get. Maybe that's part of why they don't look at it, is maybe they're just kind of building the same shelter they always see. So I could see that being part of it, but it's like it's one of those things where we had a really nice middle ground where it had a lot of the survival elements from the early seasons, and it had really interesting and inventive game elements. Immunity idols were really powerful, especially when they moved away from the hints and they were just hidden. And it was in this, I feel like Survivor was in a really great place, doing a lot of cool and interesting things. And then it's like now it's just gone, like you said, too far. It's kind of crossed that line, and we're making our way back, but we're making our way back far slower than we
Mhm.
crossed it, right? We went past the line a lot, and now we're just reversing very
Yeah.
slowly. And that's sort of a thing where that's just the nature of TV production, is that they record 2 seasons back to back in the summer. We see one of them in the fall, and we see one of them in the spring. And so, I mean, they can make some changes between the 2 of those, and they're going to make some. There's already been rumors that there are changes being made even in this next season that we're going to be seeing, but really they can't put in big changes until they
Mhm.
record again this next summer. So we're really not going to see anything drastic until 47, 48. I don't even think we're going to see anything drastic there. Where we're really going to see it'll probably be 49 and 50, because they're going to make a big deal out of that season. I can't imagine a world where they don't. So it's sort of just a bureaucratic sort of, it's just the way that making TV shows works, where it is a slow process. And And Jeff we trust. I trust that they have a plan and a way to get back, but I don't know exactly how they do that. I think we should take a quick break right here, and then we can come back and kind of finish out and really dive into a little bit more of the survival part of the early game and what we're looking forward to seeing as we move into season 2, which is where the next few episodes are going to go. So we'll be right back with that.
So I think one of also the biggest changes in terms of the Outlast aspect is just the food that they have on the island. And I
Mhm.
think also another big thing that plays into that is since each season was at a different location, people playing the game didn't really have a way to prepare in terms of what food they were going to be able to eat. They always knew they were going to be able to eat rice. That was a given, but they didn't
Mhm.
they
It's a
didn't they didn't
staple. Yeah.
know if they were going to be at a tropical location where they could have coconuts. They didn't know if there was going to be any fruiting or flowering plants around where they could eat vegetation. Really, the only guarantee was that there was going to be rice. And so, honestly, I think one of the reasons that in the new era that they're super restrictive with the food could potentially be because you can come in a lot more prepared. You can know what's the local vegetation. You can come knowing that you're going to be able to eat coconuts and papayas and things like that. And you can be prepared for those scenarios. But at the same time, they are much, much more brutal with the food that you're given. In season 1,
Yeah.
they're given the humongous crate of rice, the huge crate of rice, and then they're also given, like,
Yep.
canned foods, they're given, like, actual food on top of all the food that they're able to go hunt for and fish for and, kind of scavenge for, like, get coconuts and things like that. But
And
yeah,
winning challenges with like the
yeah,
chickens and all that
exactly.
sort of stuff.
But
Yep.
now it's just a whole nother level because I mean, you even see their it's something that I think they have started to focus on more is that hunger aspect of it, because in the new season when they were doing an individual immunity challenge and Jeff offered them a bag of rice, but a couple people had to give up their shot at immunity to get the rice, and people weren't volunteering at
Mhm.
first, and then he freaking knifes the bag and rice starts pouring out, and he's like,
Yep.
"Oh, y'all need to make a decision now or this bag's gonna run out," which is so baller of Jeff. Honestly, so sick.
It was so cutthroat. It was a moment where I was like, I I don't know if Jeff was planning on that. I
Yeah.
assume he was, but like that was just the most like it was just cutthroat. It seemed like he was just pissed off and just like the frustrations of that season had built
Yeah.
up to that moment with multiple quitters and all this sort of stuff, and he was just like he was already seeing in his head the reviews online and people being upset and all that stuff, and so he just takes out his frustration on the
Mhm.
rice. And it was such a great moment of that season, and it was like, I mean, that's
Mhm.
brutal when you're standing in front of all these like literally starving people, and you're like, no, okay, we're just gonna waste all this rice
Yeah.
right in the sand right in front of them. That was tough.
Yeah, that is honestly, I think, one of I think besides from season 1 to 45, besides the twists and things like that, I think that is the biggest change in the way that you go and play the game. Because starvation plays a huge factor in your mental health, your physical health. You're going to be
Hmm.
irritable with the people that you're with. You're going to sleep worse. You're all around just going to be like a less of a human being when you're physically starving.
Yeah, and that's where I think Jeff, like, and that's you see that in interviews where he talks about the new era and he talks about how he always says, you know, we think we've found a really good format here that has a lot of room to run. He kind of says that it's got legs. He thinks that they can take this format on for another 40 years or 40 seasons, sorry, another 20 years. So it's something where they believe in it. And he always kind of goes back to in that when he's talking about it is that, okay, it's shorter and people are upset about that, but it is way harder to survive. He's like, they have no food. He's like, they are starving. And so I think his thought is that they're compensating in length, by making a shorter duration more brutal, which I'm okay with, but show me how
Mhm.
brutal it is. That's the thing, is where if you're never really showing the survival, you're never really showing the struggle, you're never really showing the camp, how am I like, that's where everyone just sees that
Mhm.
it's shorter. We're seeing the same stuff that we saw before, but they're just out there less days. Show me how much not having rice is affecting them. We see it a little bit, but if it's really that big of a deal where you can cut out almost 2 weeks of gameplay, like I need to feel that when I'm watching the show. I want to really understand and empathize with them. And that's where like that moment of cutting the rice, like it did it, right? Where we were like, oh, that sucks. But imagine if we were watching this and each episode it was really digging into how hungry they were, how much they were struggling, how angry they were getting at one another, like almost like a survival kind of movie. I'm thinking of, I watched last night, I guess,
Society of the
but I watched the new movie
Yeah.
Society of the Snow, which I'm not going to spoil that movie, but it is a survival movie. If you've heard about the, the
You're
Uruguayan, is that how you say it?
Uruguayan.
Uruguayan plane crash in the Andes. But anyways, it's brutal. You feel it. You're watching the movie and you're like, oh my goodness, like these people, they are struggling. And it's like, obviously Survivor, they're not going through that. They're not resorting to
Yeah.
cannibalism. Okay. That's not where the show Survivor is. It's not that level of survival. But if it's that hard, Jeff, show us how hard it is. Like, I just want to see a little bit of it. And it doesn't even have to be in the main episode. Give me a Peacock, or not a Peacock, a Paramount Plus series or a YouTube series or on your website or whatever. I want to see more of that. And I think that would be something that would really help the game a lot, is give us a little bit more of the survival part, because right now it's far more like it's closer to like a Big Brother, I think, than it is to Survivor in a lot of aspects, and whether that is the reality of the island or not to a viewer, that's kind of what it is. So what I think makes Survivor cool and unique is the
Mhm.
survival part. So I'd love to see more of that and show me how tough it is, because I do believe they've made it more difficult. You've showed us that you've made it difficult, but like really show, or they've told us they've made it more difficult, but really show us, is something I'd really like to
Yeah.
see.
I agree with all that. Kind of what we've been doing at the end of the last two that we've talked about is, would we rather have what we had in season 1 or what we have in 45 in terms of those aspects? Honestly, I think when you put everything together, I think in terms of the way that the outwit and outplay go together, it makes sense with how Outlast is now. I think if
Mm-hmm.
you have the outwit and the outplay from these 45 seasons, from season 45, I think you have to go with the way Outlast is now. Even though I might like the elements of Outlast better from how it is in season 1, I think the way it couples with the other two kind of core values of Survivor, I think it works the best with what we have now. But that doesn't mean that I wouldn't like it to shift more towards what it was, because I want it to more focus on them outlasting each other and seeing that survival aspect. But at the same time, with it being the shorter format and things like that, it wouldn't be as interesting if they were given food and if they weren't working every single day for all of their food. I just think the biggest issue is we're just not shown that. So we really don't know how big
Yeah.
of an implication it is, because I really do think the outlasting now is way more intense than it was back then in terms of surviving the elements.
Mm-hmm.
We just aren't seeing it.
Yeah, that's where I think, to answer like the question that we've been doing, which what do we prefer, season 1 or 45? I'm gonna say I prefer the way Outlast is run from a technical game perspective in 45, but from a producing angle and like the edit angle,
Yeah.
season 1. Maybe that's a cop out. We're picking the best of both, sort of thing. But it's the same idea of, I just want to see more of it, because it's hard to believe that it is a more difficult game all the time if we're not seeing how difficult of a game it is outside of the challenges and tribal councils. So I think just getting a little bit more of that would be helpful. And that's, I mean, we're not the first ones to say this. That was a lot of the outcry for longer episodes. and so they gave us 90-minute episodes, but really with 90-minute episodes, we just got more twists. And so it's one of those things where I think if you take the 90-minute episodes and you cut out all those extra twists that they just tossed in and everything that we've already said, like, it's overboard, you cut those out, you give us more camp life, even if it's just 15 more minutes of camp life an episode, that's a third of the episode could be camp life. And then 15 minutes towards challenges, 15 minutes towards tribal, give it a third, a third, a third. I feel like that could be a good breakdown for like a 45-minute episode. And now you've got an extra, bit of time. I think in a 90-minute episode, is it like 55 minutes of show?
It's a little bit more than that. It's a little over
I think,
it's a little
or
over an
it's like
hour.
whatever. The way it all breaks up with ad breaks and everything is weird, but you have more time to, all right, go expand on your other stuff, but still keep a good bit of the, surviving portion in the episode. Whereas now it's just, it's mostly challenges and strategy, which is interesting and is the most interesting part of these seasons, but it's because, that's all we're shown. I think there would be a lot of cool and interesting stuff, like one of my favorite moments in Survivor Samoa is Russell burning everyone's socks. Like that's craziness. It was one of those things where you're just, I cannot believe this dude is doing that right now. That's absolutely wild. But then you see the direct impact that has on everyone in the camp and how much they're struggling and demoralized and all that sort of stuff.
In Cagayan, I can't remember her name. I think it starts with a J. But she throws her tribe's rice on the fire, which is insane. Could you imagine? Could you imagine?
I haven't seen that season. What's
crazy. Crazier is they didn't vote her out. Everyone is so mad at her.
Season 1, they would have. Season 1, they would have voted her out right
and probably
away.
In this new season 2, you'd be done with how crazy it is with food.
Yeah, you got rice as a reward.
You threw it on
and
the fire.
Then you burnt it immediately. You're out. I don't care if you're the strongest tribe member. They want you gone.
But that was,
unless it's like the merge is coming or something.
That was crazy. But honestly, reflecting on the way that the show is run now, I think being on Survival would be really cool. But the way that it's run now, I'm like, I don't know if I could do it, because it's rough. The way that you have to do it now, it is extremely tough. Before in the old format, I think my biggest hesitancy was if I was going to ever be on Survivor, like what would be my biggest struggle. I would say that I think my biggest struggle would probably just be reading people, and I wouldn't be able to tell if someone is lying to me. But I think now my biggest struggle would just be, can I last out there for 26 days? Granted, I know that if I ever got on the show, I would never quit. Quitting would just not be an option. I don't care how sucky it was, how miserable I was, I would never quit. But I would be so irritable, and it would 100% show, and it would be really hard to like control how I was feeling about just being so miserable.
Let me ask you this, because you bring up a good little point that I get that brings up a question. So a pretty big deal about season 45 is that there were quitters and people that didn't want to play the game, that came in, thought they did, decided they didn't. And they were they were demoralized, right? And we kind of talked about how the rewards, not getting good rewards, was demoralizing. But I'm wondering, do you think that the edit that we see on Survivor gives people false hope in thinking that they can do that, because they're not seeing how hard it is? Like, do you think that plays a factor where someone is like, oh, I can do that, and they're not thinking, I can fast for 21 days? They're not thinking in that mindset, and then they get out there, and then it's just way harder than they thought it was going to be, and then they don't want to play anymore. I think that maybe that also has a pretty big impact, is where it's not shown just how tough it is. If you really framed it and showed like how sucky this was and how people didn't like that, but they dealt with it because they wanted the money and they were like really committed and getting through it, I think you'd weed some people out because it's more explicit. Whereas, where like you're saying, you wouldn't survive because you've thought about it, we've talked about it, we've done all this. But for a casual person who's watching it and they're like, oh, I could do that, and they submit a tape and they have a good interview and all that sort of stuff, and they get casted, maybe they go into it with false expectations because of the
Yeah,
edit.
I 100% agree with that. I think the edit not showing how truly hard it is, where realistically they're probably eating what? Maybe a cup of rice a day, and then whatever coconuts they can find on the I don't really know how they portion it out, but it really doesn't seem like they're eating a lot of
Yeah.
rice.
Well, and you got to also think, because they're shooting this on the same island every time, I doubt there's very many coconuts out there. I don't know how fast coconuts grow and if they can grow in a year. And I would also venture to guess that whoever's recording in the second slot, right? So whoever's recording for the spring season, why were
What
there
was
balloons?
that?
I don't know. I think it just thought I was
That's so
celebrating.
funny.
No clue. I think it's a Mac. It might be a Mac thing, because Mac also does a thing when I'm on like calls at work, and if I give a thumbs up, it'll throw like a little thumbs up bubble. I don't know. It's very. We just had balloons, and I lost my train of thought. What was I talking
Um,
about? I don't remember
Something
now.
about it being hard for
For
people, people having false
yeah, I think I need to
expectations.
say, for our audio only listeners that aren't watching the video format. I don't know if this is going to be out on video or not, but we're recording video at the same time. If you didn't know, you can find us on YouTube or wherever video podcasts play. Little plug. On my screen, a bunch of balloons just popped up, and we don't know why. I didn't click anything. So that happened in my camera. So yeah, challenges, difficult. What was I
Oh,
saying?
sorry. No.
I don't
You were talking. You
remember.
said that that the beaches are like picked through, and the people who come second are just
Oh,
gonna
yeah,
have
yeah,
it
yeah,
way
yeah. Okay,
worse.
yes. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm gonna need to do some research on how fast coconuts grow, but
Oh,
I imagine
let me
if
do a
you
quick
were
Google
in
search.
the second season, that's recording, so people have just been out there for almost 30 days. I mean, they probably picked through a lot
Sup
of the coconuts, if they're
Surprisingly, it
hungry.
says they become fully formed after 9 months, so they do replenish in a year. But
They do, but I'm wondering, is that second season at a
I would
disadvantage?
assume so.
Because more balloons. Is it because I'm holding up 2
It's the one.
fingers
It's
or what?
this.
Oh, holding up a 1. I go number 1 and a bunch of balloons pop up and
Okay.
fly. That's
Well,
whoa,
now it's
that's
not gonna do it
wild.
anymore.
I don't know why that
Mine
happens.
doesn't do it.
Yeah. I don't think yours does it. No, I think it's just because 'cause I'm on a Mac, and it does that for some reason. I don't know, man. That's crazy. Imagine if I was in, like, a job interview or something really
Yeah.
serious, and that happened. I was like, "Well, one thing you should know about me," and then
Mhm.
balloons fly up. Yeah. So, okay. So the coconuts do replenish, probably. That's based off of a very minimal research. So they probably replenish. But I am wondering, like, it could be picked through. It could be,
Yeah.
whatever. That was a total derailment from where we were. But yeah, I think that there's a good chance that contestants go in overestimating their skills based on the way that you see the
Oh,
game
for sure.
portrayed. So I think that they show a bit more camp life, and maybe we can weed out some of those quitters, and we don't get any
And
more. I wonder if that
I
would have
think
an
also
impact.
just production needs to I don't really know what goes into the casting process in terms of what they tell them going in terms of how hard it's going to be, because I mean it's if you tell someone you're going to starve, it's really hard to put it into context when you've never been in that situation before, because like everyone gets hungry, and everyone when they've not had a meal for 6 8 hours they go, oh my gosh, I'm starving. But that's just it's a new level. You
Hmm.
can't even conceptualize what that level of hunger is until you are out there doing it.
Yeah, and I mean it's also you're hungry, you're you're bored out of your freaking
Mhm.
mind because you're just hanging out on this beach all day. We don't really see it, but I mean they're not
With
really
a
doing
bunch
anything. You
with a
are
bunch of
stranded,
randos you just met.
a bunch of strangers, and you probably don't like everyone there. It's high stress because you're afraid you're going to get voted out. You're doing physical challenges that exert a lot of energy, so you're burning calories at an exponentially high rate and not filling them back in. So you're burning calories very fast, and you're also, I mean, you're in the hot, you're in Fiji, you're in the sun, you're probably getting sunburnt. Like there's a lot of stuff going on. It's incredibly difficult. And so I agree. I think there's got to be a level of over preparing people to come on the show, and when you're vetting, making sure you're confident they're going to stay out there, which I think like Survivor's done a really good job about. There haven't been that many quitters in the history of the game. It was a weird I think it was probably just a weird thing this season. If it happens again, then maybe then the evaluation process needs to be looked at potentially. But I think that they've done a good job of finding people who aren't going
Yeah.
to quit. I don't know what goes into it legally, like if you can contractually require them to stay out there, like until they're voted out or medically removed or something. Like if you could be like, you're not allowed to leave, sort of thing, or they get paid, for being out there for their time. So if you don't quit, maybe there's a bonus for not quitting, sort of thing. But it's not even like framed like a bonus for not quitting. It's just you don't get the full payout if you quit, because that might make a difference for someone on the edge, sort of thing. And yeah, there's a lot of craziness and the other stuff like Sean quitting, but he wasn't gonna
Yeah, he
go
wasn't gonna
home.
go home until the
He was gonna
merge.
just he was just gonna go to Ponderosa. Like it wasn't going home, sort of thing. And I assume that they knew that, but it sure seemed like they didn't. So it's I think there can be a lot more information on the front end to prepare players. Yeah, I agree. I think that it's interesting how the survival aspect of Survivor has changed. I think a lot of it's changed for the better, but I think there's, especially now in this new era, a lot of room to improve and kind of get back to what made Survivor so cool and so interesting for so long. And I will also concede that maybe there's a better way to do it than we're doing now. We don't necessarily have to go back to heroes versus villains. Just because that's a really good season, we don't got to go back to it in the way we do it. The game can continue evolving. I can't give you good suggestions on what I would like to see implemented in the game that we haven't had before. We're kind of basing it off of our experience and watching Survivor in the game we have. But there is room for new mechanics and new things that could be cool and interesting and continue to help the game evolve. And I hope we get there. Maybe to end on that note, is there anything that from the we've talked about Outwit, Outplay, Outlast, and we'll probably do an episode with like these are the things we want in season 50. So we're just going to set season 50 as like the season that there's going to be a next
Mhm.
big change. Let's say that's when the format shifts some or whatever, because that's just kind of the expectation. If that's the case, whether it's from Outwit, Outplay, Outlast, any of those things, is there anything that you would like to see specifically come back, or a new mechanic that you've already thought about be introduced? Are there any changes that you can think of that you're like, I want to happen in there that affects one of these things that we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks?
I think my biggest change is I'm really tired of the 3 tribe format. I'm very, very tired of the 3
Yeah.
tribe format. I really hope in season 50 they go back to the 2 tribe format, or at least do 1 season 2 tribe, 1 season 3 tribe, and alternate. I think that
Yeah, we've talked about that before. I think that's the way to do it. Two tribe, three tribe, two tribe, three. You
the
alternate it
the 3
every other
tribe
season.
the 3 tribe now has just become so predictable. And it's just
Hmm.
I think they were taking a good step when they did the tribe swap, when they brought back the tribe swap last season, but I really, really want to see 2 tribe seasons again because I think they can be really interesting. And I also really, really, really want them to bring back theme seasons. I don't know why theme seasons were taken away in the first place. I think it was more just because they could
Yeah, I don't
just
know.
do the same thing every time and it saves money and it's easier to produce and they can just crank them out. But I think that's a big reason why Survivor feels like it has lost its charm. It's because it's the same thing every season and it's become extremely predictable. Having theme
I agree.
seasons brought something new to the table each season, even though the core mechanics stay the exact same. Having it not even like having the 3 tribes be themed after something. Like, they don't have to necessarily change the game mechanic where they add in Island of the Idols, where they add in, uh, things like that. If they just theme the seasons
Yeah,
where they did Brains versus Bronze versus Beauty, where the 3 tribes are themed after something, I think that would bring so much life to the show, and that's what I'm really looking forward to and hope that they bring back.
yeah, I agree. I think that the structure of the game needs to shift in some way because, like you've said, it's become predictable. Whether that's alternating 2 and 3 tribes, or something that I would really like them to try would be to do 3 tribes, and then there's a pre-merge into 2 tribes, and then that merges into a smaller merge
Yeah,
tribe of
that
some
would be cool
kind.
too.
And maybe you have a like a, if you're doing it that way and you have a smaller merge tribe, maybe there's a play in for, 1 or 2 jury spots or something. There's interesting mechanics there. I think for people to like earn a jury spot or something. But I think like even that would shake it up where, okay, there you get the 3 tribes at the beginning. And so you have 3 distinct groups of kind of alliances, like main alliances, and then you shuffle those into 2 tribes. So now you have 3 groups broken into 2 groups, and so now there's really intricate alliances. And then when that all merges, you're going to have everybody has probably interacted with just about everyone. There might be 1 or 2 players you didn't have on a tribe with you, but there's a good chance that you encountered most everyone on some level during
Hmm.
the game. And that makes, I mean, I think that makes it harder to get to the end. That makes strategy matter a lot more. It keeps it fresh from a viewer's perspective. Like, I think that could be a really interesting way of doing it as well. So I agree. I think changing that format is something that should happen. And then one thing that I agree, I'd like to see, some sort of a theme season. And going on that train, I'd really like to see some sort of a return season with some players because it's been a long time since we've had one besides Winners at War. And so I think it could be interesting to have one of, more recent players or all time. Like, my prediction for Survivor 50 is that they're going to bring back like people from all eras of Survivor. And I would really love for them to like just straight up bring out like 48
Yeah,
people, like one person from pretty much like from
I
every
agree.
season except for Winners at War, or whatever, or something like that. Like, you bring someone from every season, do this massive thing, and when you're filming, maybe you totally mess up your filming schedule, when you do this. Maybe it totally changes the way the production stuff has to work, and whatever it is. But I think something like that could be very cool. Or heck, do make, it's 51 and 52, and you bring, 24 players and 24 players, and they play, and then maybe you bring the best of them into one more. Like, that's asking for way too much, like logistically. That'd be crazy. But I mean, I think there's a lot of interesting things to do. I think season 50, we're going to get returning players. I just don't see any way we don't. I would love for it to be more than just winners. I think those are the most interesting seasons because, like, Winners at War is cool and interesting, but they've all won before. So bringing back people who were really close, got second place, fan favorites, that
Yeah.
sort of thing, I think is really interesting. So I'd love to see that come back. And then to leave it off, the kind of the last thing I would really like to see be kind of reintroduced is, and I've already said this in this episode, is I want more tribe stuff. Like, I want to see the tribes. So I would love to see, and I think this is the best way to do it, is a mini series of some kind. You've got a 90-minute episode, for Survivor, and then you drop a 30-minute episode that's just tribe life, and you can watch that right after the episode. And, if you're watching on Paramount Plus, it just runs right
Hmm.
into it. I think that would be really rewarding content for people who are fans of Survivor and would enrich their watching experience, but it's not required watching for someone who's casually watching it on cable or whatever, because it was left on the cutting room floor anyways. It's non-essential to the edit. They already determined it didn't need to go in the 90, so they're not missing anything important. We're just getting this bonus, this extra benefit, stuff that's really interesting. So I think that would be really cool. I would really love to see that be introduced. And I'm sure they're like, off the top of my head, I can't think of a lot of things I'd like to see introduced, but, you know, reducing, obviously we've talked about like the penalties and making the advantages better, and all that stuff is stuff we'd like to see. And I think are changes we're going to see over time. But for season 50, like seeing shake up to the tribe structure, shake up to, bring it back, come back players, people who have played before, and then do some really interesting stuff with the actual like gameplay and the way you're presenting the material to us. I think there's a lot of room for Survivor to grow. Like Jeff says, I think this format has legs. I just think we need to finish fixing it. Like, it's not there
Hmm.
yet. It's not totally fleshed out.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of exciting stuff to come ahead. We're at the end of our time. What are you looking forward to most in season 2 as we're about to start watching through that before we come back?
I think I'm just most interested to see what immediate things they change, because they had no structure for season 1. This was all new. So I'm just really interested to see what is immediately changed from season 1 to season 2, because they weren't filmed back to back like they are now. There was a gap between
Yep.
when season 1 was filmed and released to when season 2 was filmed and released. So I'm very interested to see what changes, if there's any change to the actual gameplay. I don't know if there is. I know idols don't come in for a little while, but are there any sort of advantages that come into
Yep.
play, or is it just straight up immunity challenges still and tribal council? So yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to most, is just kind of what immediate feedback did they see was necessary and what changed. And I think that's something that I'm just looking forward to in every season as well, seeing how we get from where we started to where we are now.
Yeah, I agree. I think I definitely want to see the changes production makes. What I'm most interested to see, though, is the mentality that players come in with, having seen one season, because I don't really remember. It's been a long time since I've seen this season. So I don't remember how they approach it. I remember a few of the players, but I remember very little about this one. I remember more from Africa than I do from Australia and Outback. I'm really interested to see what the perception of alliances are. I want to see if it's still viewed as a dirty thing and they're anti-alliance, or if it's like alliances, like we got to do it. That's how Richard won. I'm really curious to see if the way Richard played the game has any bearing on how they play, or if they're going to still approach it in this very like kumbaya sort of like we have honor sort of thing that we see in season 1. So I agree. I want to see how production adjusts and changes, but those changes I think take longer to really roll in and implement. But what I think we could see potentially a very quick change and adjustment is how the game itself is played by the people that are playing it, and if they're coming in more prepared. So that's what I'm really interested to see. I think it's going to be cool. But we will be starting watching through season 2 of Survivor Australian Outback here very shortly. And then we'll be coming back with episodes about that. There may be episodes that we release before we finished with that season, because I think we're just going to watch the whole thing through and then make some episodes about it. So if we feel like we want to talk about some other stuff, we'll do that. And then season 46 is starting
in sometime in February, in mid-February.
Yeah, it's coming up soon. It's in from at the time we're recording this, it's about probably 3 weeks away potentially. So that's something where, as those episodes start coming out, we'll probably do many episodes, kind of react our impressions of those episodes. Probably not really deep dives
just
or anything.
Our first initial thoughts on the episode, what we thought of the remaining survivors, the vote, edit, things like that. So definitely much shorter episodes than these long form ones. And if any of y'all have suggestions for anything that you want us to talk about, let us know. Send us an email, send us a DM on social media, and let us know what you want us to talk about.
Or if you're on Spotify, you can actually reply directly to the podcast. We have questions set up where you can actually just submit stuff there. So we'd love to hear from you. You can also leave us a voice message. So that'd be cool. If you want to leave a voice message and basically call into the podcast, we'd love to have you do that too. We're excited to see where this goes. Season 1 was good. We're ready to move on to and watch season 2. So I'm excited. I know you're excited. So we're going to leave you all now. We're going to go watch Survivor Season 2, The Australian Outback. Thank you so much for listening to the Idle Talk podcast. My name is Peyton. This is my friend Jacob. We've been recording this. Thank you for listening, and we hope you have a really great day.
See you later.